All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. We do have plenty of seats right here in the middle on the big high and low staircase, as well as on each side of the stage. We are about to get our panelists started here, and the event is about to begin. So if you guys want to come up front and join us here, go ahead and grab some seats. I want to introduce you guys to a couple of very, very important people that are going to help host and moderate these panels for us this afternoon. If you guys could help me welcome the CMO of Weedmaps.com, Mr. Juanjo Fejo, as well as Miss Maria Cardona, the principal at Dewey Square Group and CNN commentator.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Buenas tardes. So, thank you, Weedmaps, for putting this together. It's going to be a very interesting and important conversation that you all have invited people to participate in. But before we get into the two panels and the two panel discussions, I did want to have a quick discussion with Juanjo, who, as we heard, is the Chief Marketing Officer for Weedmaps. And particularly, Juanjo, I did want to talk to you about why you all are convening this important conversation. Why now, and why Weedmaps?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question. And before I answer, I want to also thank everybody for being here. You know, this is something that obviously people took time out of their days to come out here, and we certainly appreciate that. Oh. Is it not working? Is it better now?
Yes, great. Much better.
It's a little bit too much. For those that didn't hear me, I just wanted to sort of thank everybody for coming out here. You know, I know it's hard to find time in the middle of the day, but this is an important topic, and I'm glad you asked me the question of why Weedmaps is doing this and why now. I think what I'd say, even though I'm a fairly new... All right. Even though I'm a relatively new team member to the Weedmaps team, I think one thing that I've learned in my 4 months at the company is that the company has sort of very strong beliefs and passion about the origins of the cannabis industry and where it came from, and always sort of wanting to make sure that the people that started the industry and that sort of drove the industry and got it to where it is today have a chance to succeed in the industry. You know, we've always sort of seen ourselves as a genuine member of the cannabis community, and I think for a long time the company has been talking about what are the best ways in which it can sort of live up to that promise. In particular, sort of as you think about something like the putting together of this museum, and I don't know if all of you have had a chance to walk through yet, but it's really about telling the story of the history of the plant, the history of the war on drugs, and how it hurt so many people and so many primarily communities of color. And we really just, as sort of the biggest player in the industry, we want to help tell that story and help the entrepreneurs and businessmen and women that are trying to succeed in the industry do that, you know, in whatever ways we can.
And so, as you know, when you start talking about this incredibly important issue, social equity, you are seen as a leader in this space, but you're also going to have a target on your back. So what do you tell people when they ask you, why you? Why do you feel that you all are the right ones to do this?
I think I don't think any of us pretend that we have the silver bullet, that we're the only answer to this, but I think as sort of the biggest player in the space, I think we have a responsibility to be a part of the conversation. I think that, you know, obviously the state of California and a lot of the cities in California are trying to do their part, and they've put together a number of programs. But in reality, those programs aren't working today, and they're not working by themselves, and I think they need support. I think one of the stats that always shocks me is when the city of LA sort of opened up their application for the 100 social equity licenses, they got 1,800 applicants in the first day. That tells me that, you know, clearly the program isn't effectively set up if you only have 100 licenses for 1,800 people that are trying to apply. And so we feel that there's a role that the private sector, and sort of as the biggest players in the private sector, there's a role for us to play. And I think we can really sort of help move the needle here.
How do you think you'll be able to do that? What do you think you all can offer, how to do things differently that you think will work?
I think there's a couple of things. I think we obviously, we've been in the industry for 10 years. We have a significant amount of expertise in terms of what works, what doesn't work. We're connected all the way through the industry, from cultivators to brands to dispensaries to delivery services. And so we've seen companies succeed, we've seen companies fail, we've seen what works in NorCal, what works in SoCal, and I think we can just help educate a lot of the people that are coming into the industry from that knowledge that we have. I think in addition, we have a very strong platform that I think can help elevate and surface specific businesses, and I think we want to do that. We want to make sure that we don't just have an even playing field, but we actually help certain businesses sort of get a leg up in the industry.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we get into the panelist conversation?
I think, again, just sort of thank everybody for being here. I think this is something that, we truly care about. I think that I don't think that we're going to sort of answer all the questions today and get it right. This is the start of a conversation. I think we have, or we were going to have, our email address and website up there, weedmaps.com/socialequity or socialequity@weedmaps.com. Please reach out to us if you have ideas about how to continue the conversation. I'm going to be around until late today as well, so if you have anything that, if you want to talk one-on-one, you have ideas about how we can do this, please come and find me. This is something that we want to get right, and we want to start soon, but we want to make a difference.
Thank you, Juanjo. Gracias. We're going to go straight into our first panelist conversation. So the first panelist, if you all could join me up here, please. And I think I'm going to.
Put them down in the floor, like on the floor, maybe. Okay, that's cool.
Here, you can take mine.
Well, Che, we're ready.
Thank you. What a great looking panel. I love this. We have some incredibly interesting panelists with tremendous backgrounds that are going to add, I think, real value added to this conversation. But instead of me being able to introduce all of them because they have resumes that would last an hour each, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and to just say a little bit about their background and why they are here today. So, by all means.
Sure. Hi. Oh, hello. Sorry. Hello. Hi, my name's Hua. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Meadow. We're based in San Francisco. We build technology primarily for dispensaries. We work with over 130 retailers and delivery operators across the state. We've been at it since 2014. I'm here today because I believe in, essentially creating a diverse industry, pushing this movement forward. And it's really great to see. This is probably one of the most colorful rooms I've been in, and it's really beautiful from this side. So this is what we want to continue to push.
Thank you for being here, Hua.
Hi, my name is James McKnight, and so glad to be with you panelists and concerned citizens. I am a pastor in the city of Los Angeles. And the reason why I'm here is because matters of justice and matters of equity are important. Sometimes people in the faith community are characterized a certain way, but with all that is riding on this here, we need to have all voices moving in the same directions to positively affect change in our communities. So I'm really glad to be a part of that. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Pastor.
My name is Jay King. I am the president of the California Black Chamber of Commerce. I represent the the black chambers across the state. And I'm here because we have to make sure that we have an economic stake in the cannabis business. We're the most affected community in a negative way, and we want to change that conversation to us being the business people that we can be and that we have been when they made marijuana illegal. Now it's legal. We should be involved in a real way, and that's why we're here.
Thank you, Jay.
Good afternoon. My name is Kika Keith. I am the founder of Life Development Group. We are a social equity advocacy organization and educational organization. I myself am a Tier 1 social equity applicant. And most of all, I'm here to represent the interests of the community. You know, I come from a community that has been torn and ravaged by the war on drugs, and though we speak of it as if it's a statement or a title, there are lives that have been lost. There are children who have been left fatherless and motherless. And those are the people that I'm here to represent, to make sure that all of us are accountable to that, from our community reinvestment to the founders like Virgil Grant and Donnie Anderson that wrote and struggled to make sure that this was here for us to take advantage of today. So I'm here to represent all y'all in the House who are social equity applicants and make sure that we keep fighting and advocate for our interests.
Woo. Thank you, Kika.
My name is Andrea Drummer. I am a cannabis chef. I started in the industry in 2012, not only cooking in the kitchen, but also advocating for the fair use of cannabis and being a part of this industry. As of recently, I am also part owner as well as executive chef of the first cannabis cafe here in West Hollywood, California. And I am here because you are.
Thank you, Andrea. Like I told you, we're going to have a very interesting conversation. The first panel is going to be focused on the barriers to entering the cannabis market for people of color. And in order to do that, I think we should talk a little bit about why those barriers were there to begin with. Kika, you mentioned the war on drugs. So I'm going to start with you, because my first question is about the war on drugs. How did it impact, and then I'd love others to chime in as well. Pastor, I'm sure you have seen this firsthand, as well as Jay and others. How did it impact communities of color in California?
Well, statistically, black men were 8 times more likely to be arrested than white men, period, right? And so if you look at that as a central dismantling of the family and the black community, right, and everything and the collateral damage that comes along with that, right? And that's what we see in our communities, and you know, like I said, it's a statement that we hear, but when you start really looking at the statistics, and I ask everybody to do that and look at the stories and humanize it, then we start to really see the damage and the reason why we're here today.
Thank you. Pastor, you want to?
Yes, thank you. I think when you think about this, you know, there are strong feelings about this. And you see some of this evidence. I mean, a t-shirt says equity or war, and many of you said, there's no way in the world that I would miss this occasion. As a person who pastors in the community and is concerned about the community, I'm 54, so I remember, I was there, I experienced that, where, you know, families are just torn up. And in many cases, it almost seems like the damage is irreparable. Obviously, as a grace person, as a pastor, I know God can change people's lives, but when people get locked up for what appears to be minor offenses, when there's not equity in terms of sentencing and all that kind of stuff that we're painfully aware of, can y'all say amen to that? Amen, amen, amen. I know we're not in church, but amen. Certainly, the problem is obvious. I'm just glad that we're working to try to make a difference and right some of those wrongs. It's not easy, but it can be done. Thank you.
I am a history buff, so I'm going to speak to you guys from a historic standpoint. So in the 1920s and 30s, Prohibition was in place, and so they had speakeasies, and they served liquor illegally because you couldn't serve liquor. And you know, to us publicly. And white men that did this business, they went to jail, they got out of jail, they started back up again, And so when Prohibition ended and it was legal to consume liquor again, there were no laws that prevented those men from going back in business. So when you look at us today, and you look at the laws concerning marijuana, black men cannot participate in this business because of something they did in the past when it was quote unquote illegal. Those crimes should be wiped away, and we should be able to participate in this business the same as white men were able to participate in the alcohol and liquor business once Prohibition ended. So we keep talking about being fair and equitable and all the different things that we're doing to give people of color a leg up. But in one sense, you give us a leg up, and in another sense, you pull us back down 2 spaces, and I think that's what part of the issue is.
Hua, you come from the tech industry, yes? And so you've seen this from a little bit of a different perspective, but you think that there is still a lot more that needs to be done in the social equity space. Do you think that the local governments are doing enough?
Hey.
Wasn't a setup question or anything.
I think if anything, California is the leader in this, right? The world's watching, and we have made progress, right? If you look at the state, we have 4 counties that have really pushed an equity program, and more are following suit. You're also seeing other states that are trying to pass legislation that have been held up because they don't have an equity approach. So the conversation is being brought up, and people that have been affected from the war on drugs are able to step forward, are able to apply, and are able to get licensure. I think that's what's being held up are the nuances around integrating an industry that has been thriving for 22 years under Prop 215 in this new world of regulation, not just from the state, but locally from the building department, the fire department, all the things they have to go through permitting. And then, coupled with that, not having access to capital has been, really problematic. I think the locals are still wrestling with a lot of these issues. I think they're still getting educated, and there's only so many resources that they can expend to get caught up. But cities and counties like LA, San Francisco, Oakland, Sacramento are coming together and trying to figure out a path forward. But it takes all of us, so it's not just the local government, it's the communities and having leaders, charged up to keep moving this thing forward and having those discussions.
Everybody has to have a stake in this, right?
Yeah, it's good for everybody. And what we can lean on are also the people that have been in it for a very long time. You mentioned Virgil and Donnie. There are people in here that have been operating for a very long time. That experience, that bond, all of that we have should be brought forward in a way that doesn't look at local regulations or state regulators as an enemy or a villain. It's a partner, and everyone wants to see this thing succeed because the world is watching, and we really want to be able to show success.
Be a model.
Yeah,
right?
be a model.
Andrea, tell us a little bit about how you got involved into this. You're a chef, and so you have yet another different perspective into this. What are some of the things that you have seen both as barriers but also opportunities?
The first question, how did I get into this? I started out as a patient, specifically having bouts with sciatica once I entered into the kitchen. Also, notably, I come from the perspective of being an advocate against cannabis and completely changing that perspective and coming into not only the industry as a professional, but also as an advocate, a staunch advocate. And understanding, I think what we have to understand is what led us here. And it's a very layered conversation. We have to talk about racism. We have to talk about the disproportionate economics in terms of the income status of Black and brown people versus the opposite. That's part of the entire conversation. And so when you have a humongous ask of just applying for one of these licensings and raising the capital, that's part of the conversation. And we can't get to that. You know, we can talk about social equity, but we have to have these hard conversations and really unearth the layers of this problem, this conundrum. Yes?
And so, in terms of when you talk about social equity, when we all talk about social equity, Kika, I'm going to ask this to you. What would you see as a successful social equity program?
First of all, well-funded. You know, in the city of LA in particular, you know, we've been fighting for $1.3 million, and I mean, that's the cost of a house in a Leimert Park nowadays, right? So to me, that's the first thing that has to be done. You know, it has to be taken seriously. Right now, it's an afterthought, right? It's something that should be done because it looks good. But when you start really digging down on how do we make this work, which is why I entered, because when I looked at when Virgil first told me, I came in and learned about Measure M the day before the vote was taking place, and when I realized that there was a social equity program, and I began to read, which we got to do as social equity applicants, is read these regulations, and the first thing that I thought is that it was designed to fail, right? And coming from a background, I own a beverage company. Since 2008, I've been in Whole Foods and own my own manufacturing and distribution company, and it took me 5 years to understand how to work in a regulated environment, right? How to run these machines, how to use 53 different forms, and if I wasn't working at 2 a.m. in the morning to avoid the health inspectors, I would have been shut down, right? We don't have that opportunity when we open our doors.
Right.
So that was the first thing that I saw, and how do you have a program that even if there's a process in developing the infrastructure that we hear all the time, and the licensing and the computer software, they should be educating us, right? Yeah. There's no business education programs happening, there's no core compliance and regulation classes happening in the community. Yeah. So to me, a successful program starts at the heart, and it starts at real outreach and recruitment. Nobody's going into South Central and telling people about these events. Yeah. Nobody's going into South Central LA and telling people to go out to the city council meetings, right? And I won't say nobody. There are those of us that are doing it. So let me not discount the efforts of California Minority Alliance and other groups that do it. Right. But as a whole, where there's funding,
needs to be more done.
Absolutely, because there's funding for it, right? $53 million last year in taxes. The state just did $3.4 billion. They're projected in 4 years to do $7.4 billion. And you can't allocate funds to education and training while you're developing a licensing system. Ridiculous. Right. We're not made a priority. So you can't tell us we have priority processing and not prioritize us, thank you, Jay, prioritize us when it comes to developing programs that will make sure that we're successful. It is not about the licensing, it is about us being successful operators, period. Right.
And then getting people that can speak to the community, that the community trusts, to have the conversations with. So, and it goes back to funding. You can't give me $2 and ask me to do $1,000 worth of work. Right. And that's what's happening in our community.
Right. Jay, talk to us a little bit more about that in terms of the financial piece of this, right? Because we're here to talk about social equity, but you can't really have social equity in business without financial equity, right? So tell us a little bit about that piece of it.
Well, we know that we have a community that has been depleted from its very beginning. I mean, if you go back through history, 1919, black men coming back from World War I after fighting for this country, the first thing they say on the floor of Congress is, the greatest threat to America is the Negro soldier coming back believing he has the same inherent rights as white men, and that he will bolster his community to believe that they have that equality. So we have to shut him down. So what happened to black men coming back from World War I? They were burned with their uniforms on. They were lynched. They were murdered. When you can go to World War II, the GI Bill happened. That's when black men fighting in the war, 1.2 million, could come back and own a home. But they didn't make it a federal program, they made it a state-by-state program. So only 10% of those men actually were able to own a home. So their white counterparts became 20 times wealthier than them overnight with home ownership, and then 20% more powerful than them, more financially stronger than them because they were able to go to college. So you say, what did they have to do with today? Well, if you look at us and you start looking at America, and you start looking at the crimes committed against our community. So we can talk about Black Wall Street, but it didn't just happen there. I'm talking about where black communities were burned down simply for wanting to vote. You can't just say equity and not put dollars with it.
That's right.
Every person that qualifies should qualify for dollars with them because of the expertise they have in the field that they've had to use in order sometimes just to feed their families. So if we're going to be honest, and if we're going to have a conversation, it's got to be based in real truth. And we got to be uncomfortable in these conversations.
Right.
The more uncomfortable we are, the more honest the conversation. If we're having honest conversations, it's not hallelujah, it's hallelujah.
Maybe it's both. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's both. I mean, I think, you didn't ask me, but may I?
Yeah.
The question is, what does a successful social equity program look like? It seems to me that my father used to say to me, if it is a problem that was easily solved, it would have been solved already.
Right.
So let's acknowledge that it is a big challenge. And generally, when we have to face a big challenge, we look for best practices.
Yep.
How about we benefit from those who have successfully navigated? How about we fund those people to educate others who are so inclined to take those steps necessary? How about we look at diverse sources of funding and maybe have some tax benefit for those who will invest strategically and have appropriate economic return for such investments? And then not only the economic piece and the racial piece, but we also have to look at the legislative piece.
Yes.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area.
Yeah.
Because if we're not careful, the same criminalization of marijuana that put so many black and brown folks into jail is going to happen again. We need to be very careful about that. So there's some tough conversations and some best practices, and acknowledge that it's not going to be easily solved. That's my little 2 cents. Thank you.
Do you mind?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Oh, hi. I think there's a few things that we could do to make social equity look successful. One, if you look at San Francisco, we did expungement of all the records, anyone that had a past conviction. And I think that can go further throughout the state, throughout the country. I think anyone that's currently serving time in jail should be released. There should be a bill. It doesn't make sense that people are still incarcerated and that other operators that are trying to get licensed, they don't even have the opportunity or the pathway through. I'd also like to see costs come down. I don't know if many people know this, but the cost to operate is intensely.
The cost of doing business.
It's really high. And if you look at it through just the 4-tier tax structure that we have in California, you have a cultivation tax, you have an excise tax, you have a local tax, you have a state sales tax, and that state sales tax taxes all those other taxes. So looking at 34 to 45% increases in prices just from a partner from your local governments and your state governments that necessarily isn't providing funding, providing education, providing training, all of these things. That being said, we do have funds that have been allocated that haven't been released yet. That is a discussion on how to get that out in the most productive and impactful way. I think another way we can look at this too is homogeneity between localities on what a social equity program. So when you know it's equity, you can say definitively that this is what it means, this is how it's sourced, this is what's going on. And that distinction should drive all the way down to the consumer. Consumers should know if they're purchasing an equity product, right? Just like they know if they're purchasing something that's good for the planet, that's equity owned. We need to support not just from a state side, but a consumer education side.
So branding, maybe.
Branding
right?
is really important. Communication is really important. People want to do good if you give them a pathway on recognizing what good looks like. And I think having these structures, having these conversations, and having us as leaders in this movement can help bridge those gaps.
Can I make one other point to the successful side? Because I won't stop on financial. To me, what would make the most successful social equity program is if social equity applicants unite, right? And I heard Kat Packer say it one time where she was like, You know, y'all think y'all each other's competition, but you're not. The competition is outside of us. And if we really look at the fact, that there are 187 current licenses in the city of LA, but there will be 250 retail licenses. We can become our biggest support system. We can become our biggest supply chain supporters, and that's how we win. And I'm talking about nationally, not just here. So for me, that would be the most successful, is if we all in this room who are registered social equity applicants, if we begin to network and unite, and I think that will be what makes a successful program.
I like that.
And
Yes.
I want
Jay.
to make it clear, the reason why I keep bringing up history is because I want to hammer down the point that this isn't just a one-tier thing, that something that we were just slaves, or that these things happen in our communities. America, to any group of people that exists, more to black people than any other group in this country, we have been held down the most. That's why you have to pay this debt. Our dollar circulated in our community up to 100 times when we were segregated. No dollar circulated more than the black dollar. The Jewish dollar can only circulate 60 times in this community, 40 times in this community. We circulated up to 100 times. Sometimes our dollar would stay in our community over a year before it left. Integration didn't help us. Integration killed us. So folks who wanted us integrated didn't want us integrated because they loved black folks. They wanted us integrated because they loved our money. So we have to recognize the crimes. There were crimes committed against us, so they're not giving us anything. Nobody's giving us anything. You got a debt that's got, try to go buy a house and have debt. Try to get a car and have debt from your student loan. You can't move forward. This country can't move forward until it starts to pay the debt it owes its citizens for the crimes that were committed against it. And we have to start right there.
So let's use that as sort of the next question. What do you think the community can do to push legislators, regulators, leaders, other than everyone running for office, and so to have our people making those decisions, right, ultimately?
I've seen one legislator here. I believe I've seen Stephen Bradford, and I'm glad he's here.
I think he's going to be on the next panel.
Good, I'm glad he's here. Steve's
But what else, Pastor?
I think
What
we
do you-
have, I mean, I think
Yeah,
we,
by all means.
yeah, I think we have to get involved as a community. We have to start holding ourselves accountable. For us, we got to start loving ourselves a lot better. We got to stop telling lies about how we love each other and kill each other at the same time. You can't have it both ways. We have to let young people become leadership, and older folk. I'm 57, so I consider myself a older person. We need I need to make sure that young leadership is standing up and leading the charge, but young leadership has to understand that I'm senior counsel, so there's a lot that I've been through that you can learn something from. So we have to really start to become give and take in our neighborhood, so that we become one voice, so that as we start to speak to each other, for each other, and about each other, that is strong. And we have to start voting. We have to start voting, because there are laws that are being passed because you won't vote. And if you just voted, if black folk in this state voted at 40%, we change every election in the state. There would be no election that the candidate could win without us. So we have to start having, again, with us, we have to start having real honest conversations.
I think it's a great question. Someone once said that people are moved by desire for gain or fear of loss. So as we think about elected officials, what is their currency? Their currency is voting and finance. And so to the extent that we can speak to those who are in office and say, hey, you know what? We can't have like bait and switch. We can't go to the electorate and say, hey, we need your support for this, and then get the support, and then get amnesia about the promises that were made to the community. Yes, you can't do that. You can't do that. And then the economic piece, see, a lot of times we talk about the money and all of that, but we just can't get so emotional. We have to have the numbers. We have to have the fiscal impact.
Right.
Yeah, we're hearing you, brother, for sure. For sure, for sure, for sure. But we definitely, we have to be a little more strategic about it, because this, I mean, when people just hear us yelling, that don't make a difference. We gotta have the facts. We've got to talk about desire for gain and fear for loss.
You talked about being strategic. Kika, I'm going to turn it to you so you can say what you're going to say, but try to include in that, what are some of the strategies to be able to increase licensing opportunities for people of color?
Reading. And I would say my first practical tip is to go to cannabis.lacity.org and go to the resources page and read the Social Equity Addendum. And this was written in 2017. And the other thing that I would ask y'all to Google and read is Marquise Dawson's motion for the Neighborhood Health Fund. These are two things that were written before this law came into place that were supposed to guide how this social equity program rolled out. And it was done with probably a couple $100,000 that was asked the city council to let them know what they should do with the social equity program, and they have not adhered to what they wrote and recommended. So I would say the first thing that I implore all of us to do is read and understand what we're dealing with, and then we have to show up. We got to show up to our neighborhood councils and tell them why it's important, because there's a whole community reinvestment piece. Social equity isn't just about licensing. It is also about job creation, and it is also about affecting the communities that were affected by the war on drugs, right?
Amen.
So if we don't know what we've already been granted, the voters voted it in with Measure M, right? If we don't know, we can't make demands. And the city council and the mayor and the DCR are supposed to adhere themselves to the laws, and we're the ones that have to hold them accountable. So to me, in order to change legislation, we have to know what we're talking about. And if we understand what the foundation of that is, and it is in that social equity addendum on that website, and we talked to the city attorney and he hadn't even read it, right? So I would implore us, that's our starting point. And once we're fed with that knowledge and that power, believe me, when we go in front on the mic, and when you go to these meetings, you gotta get on the mic and be a part of the record, then all of a sudden we start to see the tone change. Yeah. And that is the only way that we can effectively make our way all the way up to the state, and we go to those meetings too. You have to. They're open for public comment. We don't show up, and so they pass by, and these committees sit there and they don't hear nothing from us. So the only thing I say that affects legislation is a knowledgeable group of people, and we have the most vested interest to do it because it's already been voted into law.
Yes, absolutely.
You said strategy. Well, what's a strategy? I think one of the strategies is we have to not concern ourselves with folk who don't believe in it or who are going to fight against it, or folk who don't believe it can happen. Deal with people that are light thinkers. If it's 10 of y'all, then the 10 of you become the group. I promise you, as you become effective and people see you, 10 will become 20, 20 will become 40, 40 becomes 80, and before you know it, you're a force. But what we can't do is continue to complain about why. What we can't do is continue to talk about how wrong it is and how unfair it is, because we're not going to get anywhere. I think you have to be solution-based, and you have to start as big or as small as you can, right, and develop from there. I think that's the most effective strategy you're going to have.
What about, go ahead, I'm sorry, I don't want to hog the mic here. What about also talking about some things that are in recent history? Think about what happened in communities of color as it relates to what we used to call the liquor store, or what they call down south the package store. Look at what happened to that industry. How many of y'all remember back in the day when you used to have pagers? Anybody remember? And brothers and sisters from all stripes of life had the little stores in the strip malls and all that. figure out what happened there, you see, in the economics associated with that. And so maybe if we tell those stories, so, well, gee, that could happen if we don't have the right people in place, helping to make decisions. Last thing I want to say is this. I mean, when you're trying to solve a problem, you have to have the operating reality of the other people. You've got to ask themselves the tough question. The people that are fighting you, what are they so afraid of? Yeah. And let's have some honest conversation about that. And once we tackle those issues, then maybe we can come to a level of compromise where it is mutually beneficial. There doesn't have to be the devil. They don't have to be the devil. Maybe they can be somebody that can be changed by proper strategy and proper implementation.
Right. Go ahead, Hua.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that come to mind when you're trying to think about how to be successful in this industry. Really, I think being a student, coming at it from a student, and leveling up across the board. You mentioned reading the social equity addendum. You should be reading every single page of legislation that is out here right now. This is as thin as it's going to be. And you're at the early stages. And, not from a state perspective, but from a local perspective too. And you need to create in your mind the map and the context and how each part of the supply chain works, where you fit in it, and then how to find the people to work together within it. The second thing is protect your time. It's one of those things, everyone is after a chunk of your time and are trying to partner with you or give you money and all this other stuff. Right. Keep whoever you keep close, and then build relationships and bridges with those that have been vetted and that you can trust but verify who they are and what their intentions are. It's very important. You have something of value that people want, right? Whether it's your background, your experience, whatever you have going on, it's really important to do that. The third is we stand on the shoulders of giants. There are people here that have done it, that are doing it, and that are continuing to do it, right? And you have people like Tucky, like Reese, Nina. There's other equity operators in here too. I see you. Thank you for doing what you do. They always have an open door. And if you need something, go out and reach out to any of us and ask these questions and not have to relearn the wheel. The faster all of us level up, the better off we're going to be in being able to not just rally as a community, but rally as a community that's educated, that can play the game, right? That if you need to do legislation and create a bill that we all need to get behind, we can do that. If we need a rally for someone to put someone in office or go to a board supervisor meeting that's banning or whatever, we can do that. We can speak the language and we can come together quick and go from there.
That's all great advice. Andrea, I want to bring you into this as well. What have you seen has worked? What have you seen hasn't?
Yeah, what I have seen has worked is being of practice. So not only are we seeking ownership and being partners and major players in this industry, but also once we do so is our hiring processes should reflect the change that we want to see. And that is of such great importance because I hear people talking about social equity, but their team and their practices have no reflection upon that.
Talk, sister, yes.
So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about you talked a little bit about what other people can do, but it's a little, if they're not, for example, what you talked about, Hua, I'm a policy wonk, so I love reading all that stuff. Not everybody is, right? And so I think that, or I'd love to hear from you all, like what are some of the easy steps that people can take? Because it really is all about civics and participating, right, in your own community. What have you seen has worked? How have other cities done this well? And what are some lessons that can be learned?
I don't know if anybody's done it well. I mean, if we're going to be honest, I just think that,
Okay.
that, they're doing it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they're doing it well. But I think we got to start figuring out how to build partnerships with each other. So if somebody is a policy wonk, I want a policy wonk on my team. I want an accountant on my team. I want my partners to be the mechanic that we need to make the engine run. So I think we have to become partners with each other, and we have to really dig deep into this thing on how we're going to be successful. I think most people think if you have a cannabis license and no matter what it is, that you're going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
That everybody's going to get rich. But it's a business. It has to run properly. And if you don't run it properly, I don't care what it is, it won't work. So I think one of the things we have to do is figure out how to be a good partner and how to find partners that match with us so that we can build a successful business and a successful business model.
Andrea, do you have anything to add, or Kika?
I did, and I wholeheartedly agree. It's really about finding like minds and partnering with people that have the same vision and beliefs as you do. And
I agree with you, that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying different skill sets,
oh, yeah,
is what I'm
absolutely.
saying.
But my question, when you say no one has done it well, what constitutes well?
What I'm saying is I'm saying none of the cities have done it well when it comes to equity, when it comes to inclusion. None of them have done it well. That's why we're here having this conversation.
We haven't seen the model yet, correct?
Exactly. What I'm saying is that the cities, when it comes to including us or including the community,
Right.
just like when we were talking, I said, if you're going to have the community involved, then you should have people from the community talking to the community. But you can't have somebody from outside the community be the voice or be the contact person if you have somebody with expertise in the community. I'm going to call a community. I'm going to call somebody who I know reads, somebody who I know is involved with the process, and say, you're going to be the person that we use to connect to the community because you're going to know all the resources, you're going to know all the players. That's all.
Jay, I think you spoke on a simple model that we started last year, right? When you said you start with 10, right? So there's 10 of us in our networking that we can talk to. And though we might not be good at this or that, we all got to learn it because these are the things that you're going to need to operate your business. So if we sit in a group and we read the regs paragraph by paragraph, there's someone, like you said, in the room that will have understanding. But it's imperative that we push ourselves because this is all we have to depend on. And if we don't push ourselves and surround ourselves with enough people, because there are, right? You can break it down and you can go to these things and gain understanding. It's by the repetition. So I would say, how do we start seeing successful modeling? I say it's when we don't depend on the city and the state, right? I think it's when we depend on each other to start working and empowering each other in small groups. And in your group, because I watched it happen, we went from 10 to 20 to 80 to 100.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So we're saying the same thing. I think we're saying it different ways.
No, I'm in agreement with you, and I'm saying, you know, we will continue to fight, and the more that we educate, then we're a stronger force to fight and make sure that legislation is prioritized. But I do believe that the success, and it has happened in Oakland, there are groups in Oakland and San Francisco and Sacramento, but we all need to start working collectively together and start networking at these groups with each other, not just with investors, because I tell you, don't get in front of these investors and don't know what you're talking about. Don't not know the equity guidelines and don't be able to negotiate your contract before you ever get to an attorney. Right? Because you are going to waste a lot of times, and there is nothing but predators out here trying to take advantage and tell you that you do not have any value. And the only way that you get your value is because you know these regs, and then we become no different than the lawyers and everybody else, because everybody's just starting to read them. This is all new to everybody. So we are in a winning position. Not only do we have the advantage of priority processing, but if we educate ourselves, we have the same level of education and understanding as our counterparts and those that have the resources, and then we add value when we're sitting at the table. So I say how we look at success, and what we should start doing is relying more on ourselves, y'all, and start talking to each other and organize little education groups and have our book reading clubs, but we're reading the regulations every week. That's the sort of commitment that we're going to start to make, and then we can take advantage of these offers for professional development. But if we don't start professional development ourselves, nobody else will, and they will come in and they will take advantage. And I'm reading contract after contract, and that is what will happen. So I'm telling y'all now, let's get together and start reading.
So we only have a couple of more minutes left, but I want to ask you each one question, and that is why? And my question is such that we're all talking here very passionately about how to get to a real social equity in the cannabis industry. Everybody in the audience is interested in this clearly, or else you wouldn't be here. Why? What is the opportunity? What is the potential for our communities? Why are we here so passionately talking about this? Why are we pissed that it's not happened yet? Why are we glad that Weedmaps is having this conversation and putting this out there to be the ones to help this happen? What is the why? We'll start with you, Hua.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if anyone's been through the museum, but, you know, toward the end you see Dennis Perone and his setup over there. And, you know, for me, the whole movement was rooted in compassion. And I kind of came through Amsterdam and saw the medical movement and how much it's helped people. Regardless if you're black, brown, or white, cannabis has helped me and a lot of other people that I've had interactions with. And so in this green rush, or greed rush, or whatever you want to call it, to me it's still about compassion, and it's about not just for each other, for the plant, for anybody else that's involved, and that a decade from now, when all this is, you know, has run its course, we're in a much better position where we can pass along a joint to anybody freely, and you know, we can all benefit. I mean, it just, in my mind, this is a table of abundance. I don't think everyone sees it that way, but the market is enormous. And if we all can sit around it and play with each other well, then we all can do well. This generationally is going to be huge. It already is. Yeah.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I was thinking when you asked the question, there was a song by Frankie Beverly called Joy and Pain. And I was thinking about the word pain as it relates to why. One, the pain in the community based upon what had happened in terms of the criminalization of marijuana. It is very, very significant. And most of our families have been impacted by this. And so that pain is something that we've experienced, and something that perhaps, if we can figure out a way to do this right, we're righting some wrongs. We are upsetting the apple cart. I was talking to Sister a moment ago, and we said, you know, we've seen this playbook before, how it works in our communities. You understand? People act like they care. They don't really care. People act like they're going to help, but they don't really help. It leads to exploitation and pain. So that's the first word, pain. The second word is not joy, but it's promise. If we can do this properly, the promise of major transformation in terms of wealth, in terms, and not just for those who are in this industry, but my hope is that not only will the wealth flow to, but it'll flow through. So these communities that have been so torn up by the ugliness of the history can be fixed. That's what this is supposed to be about. Then we ask for your vote, we get your support, we promise the money is going to flow, and the money is supposed to flow, but if that doesn't work, then everybody's still ticked off. So it's the pain and the promise.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Jay.
14% of billionaires come from investment and finance. That's the number one sector of billionaires and multimillionaires in this country, 14%. We get to invest in a business that can literally enrich our community. I'm an investor. I invest in the stock market. So Canada, in the country of Canada, cannabis is legal. So I invest in ACB, Kronos, CGC. CGC is Canopy Growth. They got $4 billion from Constellation infused into their business. And when you start looking at the cannabis business, I happened to catch it in the beginning when it first started about 1.5 years ago, and I just made a ton of money in investments. When America opens up, because it will, because it's starting to open up cannabises around the world. It's not just here, it's not just in Canada, it's around the world. Yeah. When America opens up, we being placed in the right positions at the right time will have the opportunity to become multimillionaires and billionaires if done correctly. And that's simply the reason why.
Well, I would say my why, or our why is duty and responsibility. We have been granted an opportunity that historically has never been given to us. Right? When you look at the alcohol industry, the cotton industry, the tobacco industry, we have never been given the opportunity to participate. And so I say, first and foremost, it is the duty to that obligation to right those wrongs ourselves, because it's been put in our hands. We will be the license holders. And so I say it is with that charge and responsibility that we move number one. And as the panelists have said, the why is our children's children, right? They will be the ones that ultimately benefit from this hard work that we do, from setting the standard of what community benefits look like, what community social responsibility looks like, and what it looks like when the power is given to those who have been oppressed. And I think we have a high obligation and a duty and a responsibility to carry that out and to show them that's what we've been telling y'all all along we would do if you give it to us. We are a loving people. Absolutely. Right? We are a caring people. And we care for humanity, and that's what this is about, and that's what the why is, because we must be an example to that.
Well said.
Thank you. Andrea.
My why is simple. My why is to advocate. I think it's important to me to advocate for the true pioneers of this industry, and those are Black and brown people who are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes. And that is why, in great part, why I do what I do. And ultimately, it is to love, to create, and to inspire.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you all. Hua, Pastor Jay, Kika, Andrea, big round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we will bring up the second panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right.
Oh, sure.
Hey, attention, whoever owns a Nissan Maxima license plate 7XJU818, your car is about to All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys want to grab your seats, we're about to get this panel started. Everybody out on the smoke patio, if you guys want to get inside and grab a seat, if you guys over a lot of food and drinks want to finish on up, grab yourselves a seat. We're about to get this second panel started for social equity.
You guys ready? Thank you all for being here. And if you were here before, for staying around. We're going to continue our very robust conversation with yet another group of outstanding panelists that are going to continue this very interesting conversation. So, like I did last time, I'm going to give my distinguished panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about their background and why they're here. So, without further ado, let's start. Frank?
Hi, welcome. My name is Frank Louie. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce. We're a statewide chamber of commerce advocating and supporting the 620,000 Asian Pacific Islander-owned businesses in the state of California. But equally as importantly, we support minority businesses, diverse business enterprises, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, with business assistance and technical assistance throughout the state in all industries. Obviously, after the passage of Prop 64, we decided to support the cannabis industry as well, and have provided business assistance, outreach, education, and support advocacy policy for the cannabis industry as well. In addition, in Sacramento, we are operating the Social Equity Business Assistance Technical Assistance Program in the city of Sacramento. So we're helping social equity applicants with boots on the ground help in helping them start their businesses.
That's what Kika was talking about. Thank you, Frank, for being here. Armando.
Yeah, thank you. Armando Gudiño, Policy Manager with the Drug Policy Alliance, a national organization focused on ending the war on drugs, working in areas of criminal justice, marijuana policy, and an area known as harm reduction, which looks to mitigate the direct and collateral consequences of drug laws, drug use, and the application of those drug laws. And we were also one of the 3 primaries who worked on Proposition 64 in 2016.
Thank you for being here. Yvette.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yvette McDowell, and I'm a cannabis law attorney. A little bit about my background. I'm a former prosecutor. Yes, and I prosecuted a lot of cannabis offenses.
Wow.
I want you to know that. So don't boo. Don't boo. Because I'm here and I was good at what I did. Okay, but now I am in the cannabis industry as a result of my mom dying from Parkinson's. And once learning about the medicinal benefits that cannabis was showing with Parkinson's, I said, I will devote my time, my energy, my effort to making sure people have choice, because she didn't get a chance to do that. So I've been in the industry since 2017, and I have been schooled by a lot of people around here, a lot of great people. Felicia Carbajal, Donnie, Virgil, all of these folks I've learned a lot from. But I'm here for social equity. Never wanted to deal with that when I was first learning about this industry, but social equity kept coming to me. And the more it came to me, the more I saw the inequities in this industry. And once seeing that, it was like, it is on and cracking. My job simply is to make sure equity applicants have a fair shake, that predatory lenders are not taking advantage of them, and they are getting what they deserve. Because remember something, folks, I'm a former prosecutor.
Yeah.
Okay? Oh, yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Senator?
Good afternoon. First, let me thank Weedmaps for conducting this panel discussion. My name is Steve Bradford, and I'm a state senator representing the 35th Senate District, which is the South Bay communities of Inglewood, Carson, Torrance, Gardena, San Pedro, you name it, Little Watts, Willowbrook. But I'm here because of the lack of diversity that exists here in this space, but not just in the cannabis world, in the tech world, and just about anywhere when you talk about we needing equity and home ownership here in California and across the nation. So I've introduced a series of pieces of legislation. Last year I authored SB 1294, which was the Social Equity and Inclusion Bill that created 4 positions in the Bureau of Cannabis Control, and it also provided $10 million to help social equity programs, head programs. Don't clap yet, because we got 30 million this year. So we have, and one of the things I'm most proud of, the governor is committed. Governor Newsom is committed to diversity. He understands if this industry is going to survive, it has to look like California. It has to have people of color. It has to have women at the table. It has to have our disabled veterans. It has to represent all of who we are as California and as a nation as a whole. So I want to make sure it's done right. It's not enough to pass Prop 64 and then let everybody, run into California and try to profit off of it. I want to make sure the people that have been impacted by the 40-year war on drugs has an opportunity to reap some of the economic benefits, because if we were talking about the criminalization of cannabis over the last 40, 50 years, it'd be nothing but black and brown people in the room. Yep. But when we talk about the opportunities, the economic opportunities, we're absent and we're devoid and missing from the discussion. So I want to make sure that we include everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. In our last panel, we talked a lot about what brought us here. What were the big pieces? We talked about the war on drugs, which I want to get into a little bit with you, Armando, since you have been so immersed in policy. But we also, in this panel, we want to focus a little bit more on solutions, on what do we do now to make sure that our communities, all minority communities, not just in California, but nationwide, are able to be positioned in the best way possible to take advantage of the tremendous opportunities we talked about at the end of the last panel. So, Frank, I'd like to start with you. You talked about some of the programs that you're doing, which sound incredibly needed. I think Kika was talking about this in the last panel as well. So I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that, because I think it's worth knowing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the beginning, a few years ago when they legalized, the biggest gap was really knowledge and education about, and where to go find and get information about opportunities. And opportunities could be, regulations, legislation, at the local and the state level, but also just business assistance. So our organization and through our foundation, we've been providing education for minority businesses for many, many years. And decided that legal cannabis industry in California needed that same assistance. So we developed outreach and education programs. Many of you may have participated in our Cannabis Talks Roundtable series, where we brought stakeholders together throughout the state and various cities to really create a forum for education, knowledge, and discussion. We continue to do study missions to other locations in the United States and other countries, and we recently got back from Canada to give stakeholders, regulators, et cetera, the opportunity to learn and come back and apply those lessons learned in their local regions. And I think most importantly, and where I've seen the most impact is we're in the early phases of of the social equity business assistance we're doing in Sacramento. And this is the hands-on outreach, accessing the diverse communities, trying to give them the business assistance and education just to how to start your business, how to run your business, how to develop your business, how to survive if you're fortunate enough to get a license, how to survive and survive in this space. So that's the work that we're doing, and we continue to do that work, and it's, you know, aligns well with our mission.
That's great. Thank you. Senator, I want to turn it to you. As a legislator, you have a unique perspective in this, obviously from a legislative standpoint, from a policy standpoint, in terms of what are the laws that either we need to take off the books or the new ones that we need to put in. How can activists and the community be helpful to you to help you do what you need to get done?
First, be engaged. Many times we hear about what's not happening, but you're not at the table helping us craft what needs to happen. So we definitely need to hear from you. You also need to track legislation. Many times bills have passed and then folks want to come to the table and say, how do I benefit from it? When you should have been at the table early on helping us craft the legislation and following it along the process. That's key. But also, we as legislators have to be better educated, because I have colleagues who, no matter what you say about this industry, they got a closed mind to it. So they need to see the diverse face of who the cannabis industry is. We need to change the discussion, change the paradigm of what cannabis is. First, we got to move it from Schedule 1. It shouldn't be on a Schedule 1 first and foremost. So we have to do that on the federal level. And we see hope and promise with that when we see now 33 states that have some form of legalization. It's going to be hard once you hit that certain tipping point for it still to be classified as a Schedule 1. But again, we need you as individuals to come and educate us on what you need. We need to look at some the tax reform too on this. I mean, that's a barrier to entry where if you make it too costly, why should I go to a legitimate operation? I'm going to continue to deal with the underground economy. So we as legislators have to kind of like moderate what we think is appropriate taxes on this, because again, we're not experts in everything, but people assume simply because we were elected, we know how to solve all problems. So we do need to hear from you. We need you engaged early and often, and just make sure that, like I say, we know who you are and where you are.
You reminded me of a statistic that I was told as I was preparing to do this panel, and that is that Los Angeles, just Los Angeles, is the biggest legal cannabis market. It is also the biggest illegal cannabis market. So lots of challenges, lots of opportunities there. Armando, I want to go to you to talk to us a little bit about the policy history here. You have been immersed in this for many, many years. Give us your perspective as to how we got here and what we need to do to try to make things better.
Yeah, thank you. You know, actually, the senator just touched on it, and that's this issue of political will. And first of all, let me commend the senator's work. You know, as somebody who does navigate policy as part of my day job, I will say that the senator is among our leaders in the cannabis policy community who has done substantive work to ensure that we start to dismantle the very mechanisms of this drug war that got us to where we are today. That said, I want to share some numbers with you guys. In 2017, ladies and gentlemen, this country arrested 1.67 million people for drug law violations, of which 85% were for possession, of which 659,000 were for marijuana violations, of which 650,000 were for marijuana possession in 2017. That is 90% for marijuana possession in this country today. Yet, as the senator pointed out, if you look at it from the opposite end this way, there's I think three states in the entire country that do not have any form of cannabis product by which they use in some form of a regulated market, whether it's CBD, medical, recreation with 10 states, plus the District of Columbia. So it's about political will. I was a junior analyst in 1995 when I was working with a firm who went in to advise the then city council and mayor of Los Angeles and said to them, hey, the numbers in the polls are showing that this medical marijuana thing is gonna pass. And it took them, what, 20 years before they went to address anything on medical marijuana. And I was there in and out of that policy shift, and I was back there in 2010 when we failed with Proposition 10, was it 10? Right? We failed to pass that one, and by 2016, we were able to succeed. And we did so in part because we had learned so much. And we learned so much, and yet we didn't have critical mass support for this legislation, ladies and gentlemen. You should know that. And immediately following 2016, this year my office started tracking 120 bills that contained the word cannabis in it, of which 46, I might be off one or two, actually look to alter and/or impact Proposition 64 this year in 2019. So when you have a war, a drug war, that was systemically used to turn it into a war on communities of color, a war on the poor, and a war on immigrants. This is what we have 40 years. Today we spend $50 billion on this drug war. 25 from the federal government, 25 from state and local governments. So here's the thing, you guys. When we talk about social equity, it is important that we understand that social equity is not going to repair 40 years of destruction. It's not going to repair the damage caused, the fundamental damage caused to families. The senator has a bill that will open up doors, but many of us, we can't forget one important factor. We passed in 2016. We didn't really get going until maybe 2017, maybe even arguably 2018. There is a provision, and I'm gonna put the senator on the spot. There is a provision that calls that by 2024, 23 actually, the state of California can open up to large-scale licenses. So if we're barely gonna get financial support from projects like that of the senator, to, as it was pointed out, I believe one of us here pointed out that to give us a financial boost to help us develop our market, help us develop our industry, and in years, we're gonna open up the industry to large-scale operators. Guess what? Social equity ain't gonna mean shit. Ain't gonna happen, right? So when we talk about policy solutions, one of the things we gotta start talking about is how do we push back that 5-year threshold, right? That's one concrete solution. Another solution is that, look, when we drafted Prop 64 at its original state a year prior, there was 23 initiatives that were being floated around, 23. Do you have any idea of the politics behind gathering 23, turning it into one? Some people still don't talk to each other. So when we look at 2019, looking towards next year, and we still see 100 pieces of legislation that contain cannabis and another 40, 50 that want to alter Prop 64, I want to challenge the senator and other legislators to come up with a more strategic way to consolidate, at the very least, information sharing opportunities so that we don't end up with a piecemeal operation, which is what we've been doing since we passed Prop 64. Ladies and gentlemen, this state has somewhere in the area of, I think, 458 cities. And I'll leave you with this text, or this fact, before I pass it on to my colleagues. 70% of the state has not regulated in this state. So when you talk about the challenges associated with having an equitable market, how are you gonna have an equitable market when almost 70% of the state hasn't regulated? It does not have a legal framework by which you can go and apply for a license. So the burden of responsibility, yet ironically today, the community reinvestment portion of Prop 64, which I'm very proud to say that was one of the things that I worked on, community reinvestment grants were released today, and millions were offered. Ironically, as I looked through that list, I swear to God, I saw one or two organizations who didn't support us during Prop 64. Political will, ladies and gentlemen, political will. We need to start figuring out a way. You know, I would encourage the senator, come up with an advisory committee that at the beginning of the year, when you have 100 bills talking about marijuana, have one central body outside of government who can look at this objectively and make recommendations so that you start consolidating all these political agendas. I'm sorry for taking up so much time.
Good idea. Thank you, Armando. Yvette, I want to bring you into this. You also have a very unique perspective on this whole issue, having done what you did before, as you said in your intro. You talk about all of these changes that need to happen, political will, but also storytelling, right? You changed your mind because of something you went through, and I've had a lot of conversations with folks that also changed their minds because of personal stories that they went through, either health-wise themselves or their families. What can, again, the community do if they are up against trying to change minds of people who maybe aren't necessarily open or don't have that kind of experience around them? What can we do?
Thank you for that question, and I just want to say thank you for the host of this event. There's so much that we can do. I mean, so much. We have to start with education. That is the number one thing that must go on out here, education. I'm really disappointed with the lack of attendance here from folks of color. This room should be standing room only. I hear all the time, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And my thing is, if you're not going to sit at the table to help plan the menu, then don't cry. Okay? When the dinner comes, do not cry about what's on the plate, because you chose to stay at home. Getting involved with organizations that really can make a difference, and sometimes you're going to have to push some of these organizations. As soon as I got involved in this industry, I started learning who are the organizations out here, who are the people, where can I do the most good for people? And I decided, because I like politics, I got involved with the California Cannabis Industry Association, and regardless of how you may feel, I did that because I knew that they were the leading state organization here to go out and promote and be politically involved. That's how I met Senator Bradford. We started having discussion about things, and so now he and I have become friends. But how did that happen? I got involved. Okay, you have to get involved. The Minority Cannabis Business Association, how many of you know about it? How many of you are involved? I've been to Washington, D.C. 3 times lobbying up on Capitol Hill in the House and the Senate to talk about cannabis. Why? Because I got involved. You start helping to shape policy. You start helping to educate your political opponents out here. You have to do this stuff. I've heard people say that, well, if you want to keep something from black people, put it in a book.
Wow.
And I know a lot of you have probably heard that too, and you may have said that. So one of the things, believe me, you're going to hear me keep it real. Okay, I'm not going to twist my words. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. Senator Bradford, I am so appreciative of him doing SB 1294. But what I'm unhappy about is the governor has come along and watered it down. And that does not sit well at all, at least not to me. If you're going to have a true social equity piece of legislation, you must keep black and brown people in there mentioned about the war on drugs. The war on drugs was not pretty, folks. It was not pretty at all. I saw a lot of people destroyed as a result of that. And believe me, for the minor things where you can't get loans, you can't get student loans, you can't get access to capital, you can't do much of anything, housing, everything is impacted. And this is the type of thing that needs to be worked on. Expungements. Everybody wants to talk expungement clinics, et cetera, and I, for one, I don't like expungement clinics. I don't like participating in them because we have a district attorney, we have a city attorney in Los Angeles with the stroke of a pen can minimize all of this stuff. Can minimize it. If you
And
have
doesn't
a
want
to. Exactly.
Doesn't want to.
But does not want to do it. So while all of these clinics are going on, Jackie Lacey, and I think it's Fura, who's the city attorney here, correct me if I'm wrong, they can do this stuff without clinics being held. We can go in and we can sit with the prosecutors, we can sit with the public defenders, we can go into the judges' chambers with a stack of expungement forms. And believe me, we can take care of all of that stuff in an afternoon. Right. So that's why I don't agree with all of these expungement clinics. While I think they're good for people, there's just easier ways to do things and make changes happen. So this is not impossible to do. People must be willing. There has to be the political will, and there must be the will from you, the people, to get involved and stop waiting on other people to do for you what you need to do for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
This is what you have to do.
And that actually seeps into all of the issues that need to get done. Armando, you said he doesn't want to. They don't want to do it, right? But the reason they don't want to do it is because they don't feel like they need to. They don't feel the pressure from the communities, right? If they felt that pressure, they would change their minds. That's how politics works. So again, to your point, Yvette, and frankly, the point that all of you have made is get involved. And if we, as we say in DC, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We don't want to be that. Frank, I want to turn it back to you. You talked about a lot of what your organization is doing, the programs that you are putting out there to help people. You must also have seen a lot of folks who have jumped into this industry in good faith, but have made a lot of mistakes along the way. Can you tell us, just so you know, for those people who might be thinking about doing it or who are in the middle of doing it, save them some time and maybe learn from some of the mistakes that you have seen people make?
Yeah, I know it's a great question. So, you know, I haven't been through the process myself of starting a cannabis company, but really we focus on, you know, it's starting any business is tough and it's challenging. I think that some of the best practices of just, our first cohort in Sacramento, we had 51 participants. Just the learning and the knowledge and the best practice sharing amongst them was more valuable than some of the knowledge and education that we were providing. And I think the other panel, they touched on this as well. I mean, I think education is clearly, you know, missing. I mean, and it's really business education, general business, you know, the challenges, you know, the regulations, compliance, all the things that you have to tackle to succeed in this business. And if you're fortunate enough to get to the point of getting a license and starting your business, it's even more difficult to maintain and keep your business, you know, open, right? So I think I think, you know, there's no one major challenge. I mean, there's two things that I've seen just in Sacramento and is happening in many other jurisdictions as well. So we're helping the social equity applicants. Some of the biggest challenges are there's minimal licenses or there's license caps. Yeah. So we're nurturing and helping these entrepreneurs on their journey, but now we have to figure out how to open up more licenses or open up more jurisdictions so they have opportunities to start their business. Right. That's the other challenge. And obviously, you mentioned the other earlier is access to capital. Continue to find ways and solutions to find funding and sources of capital to help them start their businesses.
Thank you.
Can I piggyback on that? Have a business plan. A lot of folks just think, oh, I'm going to sell some weed and it's easy. You need a business plan. It's no different if you're opening up an engineering firm, a marketing firm, a construction firm. You have to have a business plan. And you have to broaden your horizon on what this industry is. Far too often, the people who come talk to me, they want to do one or two things. They want to grow or they want to sell. And it's a wide array of opportunities in between there, from commercial kitchens to packaging, distribution, manufacturing, and the one that no one talks about that is needed more than anything else, testing laboratories. Everything that hits the street has to be tested. We do not have enough testing laboratories for the cannabis that's going to be grown here in the state of California. So I wish folks would talk about opening up testing laboratories. And why you have pushback from local elected officials, because they don't want dispensaries on every corner. Just like we don't want gas stations and liquor stores on every corner, they don't want dispensaries on every corner. So if you can come up with a business plan that is going to employ people, first and foremost, create some revenue, but at the same time not be the eyesore that many people see with the dispensaries, or even with the grows. It's downtown LA. It's a lot of my friends who own businesses that are fed up with the number of grows that are now on Los Angeles Street, because it's running away most of the retail business folks who used to come and shop and buy clothing there. They're run out of there. They're not shopping there anymore because of all that grows there. So I say have a business plan, really think this out, because it's not just about, you know, putting a light out and selling this stuff, but open up a commercial kitchen, whether it's for CBD or psychotropic uses. The product has to be made. So think along those lines.
Yeah, you know, I can't agree more about the business plan. You know, although we're a policy shop, it always surprises me how many people come to us thinking that we actually advise on that kind of stuff. And, you know, we'll take a minute to kind of redirect them. The business plan is paramount. I always encourage people, you know, take a step back and, first of all, really, as the senator brought up, you know, the two things I hear the most is I want to grow or I want to sell. Yet we have over 20 different types of licenses that are being made available. We have to face the reality. Maybe not all of us were meant to be business owners, right? Some of us are just not good at it, folks. I've actually had people come to my office and say, I've heard about the social equity, how do I open up my first weed shop? That does not mean that you automatically get a weed shop, ladies and gentlemen. So, you know, there's something about all the ancillary industries that are coming up as a result of the 20 some odd licenses that are available. I always encourage people, study the political landscape around where you live, right? LA is the first go-to place everybody and their mom wants to open up a shop in. Yet, as I pointed out, incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, LA County reflects the state in terms of percentages of licensed cities. In other words, 70% of the county, of the 88 cities within the county limits, have not regulated, right? So we're not even at 50%, God forbid, to say we've passed critical mass. So if you don't have the capital, which we know is difficult, if you don't have the resources readily available, don't go applying for social equity. Position yourself properly. Find out, go to city councils, learn who's next in line, who's already entertaining conversations. Maybe even if you come by my office, I might tell you, hey, by the way, city of so-and-so, they're already entertaining possible regulation. I'll give you one final hint. My office is going to launch a series of presentations in partnership with the LA County Department of Public Health. I sat on a committee, the Public Health is released a report, the most comprehensive report on the negative impacts of the illicit market in communities of color. It is that report we hope to encourage other cities who haven't regulated to start looking towards that, because LA County Public Health is telling people it is better to regulate. So the political landscape is changing, ladies and gentlemen. Do your homework, study it. LA might not be your market, but you might end up in a market down in the southeast corridor who, guess what? You might be the only, because the city only has 100,000 people. It might turn out a better business venture for you. Food for thought.
Thank you. Yvette, I want to go to you. You talked about one of the policy changes that you think could be done pretty easily if there was the political will to do it. What are some other policy solutions that California hasn't implemented that you think could add to the social equity landscape?
Again, getting involved. You must get involved. You have to start locally, because all politics start locally. And if you know your council members, whoever else is operating in your jurisdiction, that's where you have to start. You have to start educating them. Once you start educating them, that means they're listening to you. When they listen to you, you now have an opportunity to put ideas in their minds. When you put ideas in their minds, this can translate into policy changes. So it's a step-by-step process, but you have to get involved. You cannot wait on somebody to do it for you. And it's not as difficult as you think. This man's approachable right here. Okay, just know that. He's approachable. Talk to him. Educate
Like Tupac,
him.
I'm not hard to find.
See, not hard to find, but the thing is, once you start talking to him and telling him your story, why you're doing what you're doing, it's going to make a lot of difference to him than just you coming up saying, I want to open up a weed shop. Okay, that is not going to get it. Let me tell you, 2017 is when I learned about this industry from the legal side. That's when I started learning. But again, educating myself on everything I could, I got elected to the board of directors for the California Cannabis Industry Association in a short time. And now I chair the Social Equity Committee. And what I plan to do with that, I am very vocal about it, very vocal. And when there's stuff coming up that I don't think we as an organization are really supporting, they hear my mouth, and they hear it loud and clear. But because it's an advocacy organization and they have direct access to the governor, to the senators, to the representatives, they can get that message across. And so again, it's going towards legislation and to move on with the type of things that we could do to help. Let's put in something that is going to create training centers for individuals. The people I talk to, they don't have a clue as to where to start. We want training organizations where people can go in and learn about every aspect of this business. I mean, as they say, from the rooter to the tutor. Okay? Some of you don't know what that means, but ask somebody, they'll tell you. But you know what I mean. People need to know. We need the Cannabis 101. We need to know what it's like to regulate, to have the fire department come in and check, to have water and power come in and check, to have the police department come in and check. All of this stuff is part of this industry. It's part of the business. And when you don't know that, that is what subjects you to predatory lenders. So you have got to be the one to want to get engaged, but part of that legislation, I really think needs to go to putting together these training facilities with the experts in the industry. Now, I'm talking about folks like you who are master growers, you know, who manufacture, who have retail stores. You guys are the experts with this, so come on in, bring your skill set, and say, hey, I'm opening up shop to be a learning center for these new people. Walk them through it, do on-the-job training, that's what they need. So legislation to that effect would be wonderful to see these type of centers built.
Did you hear that, Senator?
Yeah, and part of 1294 has some of those components in there. Also SB 595, which I authored, it's on the governor's desk. He has until October 13th. It has fee waivers, it has technical assistance for people who are trying to get into this market. We understand it's a complex industry, and I even challenged Lori Ajax to hire folks who might have some experience, might have done some time, who understand this market, because you can't do it from a law enforcement mindset alone. You have to have it from the ground, some ground experience. So we need to diversify the governmental entities that are overseeing this market as well.
Frank, what about from your perspective, what other policy solutions should we be looking at? Should California be looking at?
You know, I think all of them are valid. You know, I think some of the biggest gaps I see is still access to the diverse minority communities. The education's, you know, not getting into all those communities or getting there consistently. So we continue to try to, you know, put programs together to access those diverse minority communities, work with community partners to just provide some education. And I think there's some really interesting opportunities on the workforce side. We put together some workforce training. There are some great jobs. I mean, we're going to try to help open up all these businesses. Well, they all have to hire people, and they need training, they need education and knowledge. So we want to try to put some of those programs together to help on the workforce side as well. And we're going to take some of the things that we've piloted in Northern California and do some things down in LA with a collaboration with North Star Alliances and try to bring some of those ideas down here to help the business community.
Great. Armando, I'm curious, from a policy standpoint, what is the reasoning behind the number of licenses that there are, or I guess the low number? What is the thinking of the decision makers that go into, oh, I'm going to pick this number?
You know, it's a great question, and I kind of, you know, as I pointed out when we first did this project back in '95, and, you know, back then the excuse was, you know, it was the first time we were going to legalize anything in the entire country, world, for that matter, and people were just afraid as to what was going to happen with the federal government. Done, okay, get that. I think now, you know, listen, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that has happened over the years. The drug war, as much as it was devastating physically, physiologically, mentally, socially, it's also been very much a psychological war in which this war has been fought out through misinformation and the criminalization of not only people, but a product and the act of consuming that product. So what you end up with is an entire apolitical segment of the very political body who refuses to address the politics of cannabis. I live in the city of Downey, and I got legislators there, elected officials, who are still prohibitionists, right? Who still believe that the war on drugs is some sort of, you know, horrific, oh my God, the scourge of society. And you sit there and look at them and you're like, damn, you're younger than me. How in the hell did you acquire that state of mind? So I think, you know, from a policy perspective, there has to be much more of a concerted effort. One of the ideas that I would love to see is those state legislators, like the good senator here and the assembly members and other Congress folks, to actually work with the cities within their district who are prohibitionists and have an engagement. Help them get to that point where maybe, perhaps, they can start looking at regulatory models. Look, there's folks out there who did the model ordinances, MCBA. There's a lot of other advocacy groups, certainly Drug Policy Alliance, you know, who can be there to help with the drafting process to develop responsible, good policy, right? One that's rooted in equal representation of those most impacted and those that are gearing towards the future. Another perfect example of good policy, migrants and other immigrants, right? One of the largest base of business owners in this country, and there's been absolutely zero effort to reach out in any language other than English, yet there is more Mexicans in the city of LA than in the second largest city in Mexico, Guadalajara, making city of LA the second largest Mexican city in the country, in the whole world for that matter, right? Very little outreach in that area, right? So sure, can we cover all grounds? No. But you have groups, agencies, and other operations that are here to say, hey, we're here to help. We've been here from back in the days. We were here up and coming through, and we'll probably be here tomorrow.
Senator.
And from the prohibition standpoint, there are local elected officials who just say no to cannabis. And I've had those sit-down meetings. I have.
Like, just no.
Just no, but I was willing to have conversations because I have a few of my elected officials who are former police chiefs. And they come with that mindset of lock them up, it's a drug, it's bad. And not until I sat down and had conversations with them, said, okay, we need a commercial kitchen. I says, what about the little baby that's having a seizure and he needs an edible product? They changed their perspective. So I have one of my cities who was definitely held no on cannabis is now open to a commercial kitchen. Is now open to the manufacturing and distribution of a CDB product. But again, we have to educate those elected officials to understand this is a plant. It's not a drug. The biggest drug dealer in this country and in the world is Big Pharma, and it's killing thousands of people per day, and we're not locking up any of those folks. And we need to understand the war on drugs here in this country has not been 40 years. It's been 90 years. It was in 1930 when they made cannabis a Schedule I drug. Does anybody know why? To arrest black and brown people in this country. That was the only reason. And all of our horrible laws that have been on the books for more than 50 or 60 years, I guarantee you there's some racial connotation connection to why it was implemented. So we need to know it from a historical standpoint. And when you look at movies like Reefer Madness, and it says if you smoke marijuana, you're going to do what? You're going to be running around like an African with a spear, with a ring in your nose, chasing people and terrorizing white women. And that's what Reefer Madness was all about. And they did a fantastic job of scaring half of America to say, oh, I don't want to smoke cannabis, but it's a plant. We didn't create this. It's not man-made. The opioids and heroin that's killing people on a daily basis, that's man-made.
Right,
This is a plant.
And Senator, can I just add one thing? And I'll say what I hope the senator wanted to say. When it started killing white people, then it became a fucking problem. Okay? Because the minute that, you know, when it comes down to people that look like me or that look like the senator, you know, that's not a problem. On the contrary, there's a solution in that we can arrest them now, incarcerate them, and put them away. But the minute it starts killing white folks, then we got a fucking epidemic.
True enough.
Right? In 1901, ladies and gentlemen, you could buy a gram of cocaine on the counter of Woolworth Pharmacy for 25 cents. It was legal. It was something you can access readily available. Just go out there, put your quarter, and you get a gram of pure yayo, pure cocaine. And when they realized that people were partying with this, and they saw the opportunity to criminalize black folks by calling them zombies and raping white women because they too partied with the stuff you could buy over the counter, then it became illegal. Then it became the tool of incarceration. Chicanos, Mexicanos, the very first marijuana arrest in California happened on Broadway Street. A 16-year-old kid, Broadway ignored. He was smoking a joint. They said, come here, fuck you, little Mexican, go to jail. And then there began the war on drugs against mostly Mexicans here in California. And let's not talk about the Chinese in the 1800s. So yeah, we go way beyond prohibition. Ladies and gentlemen, the very first drug cartel in this country, the very first drug cartel in Mexico, you know how they started? From smuggling rum and whiskey during Prohibition to the States. Gave rise to the very foundation of organized crime in Latin America, which today 200,000+ people have gone missing or died in Mexico alone from this campaign of the war on drugs, led from this very beast. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
My blood pressure's up now.
I think we have time for a couple more questions, but one of the ones that I wanted to ask that brings us back to the reason why we're here, which is Weedmaps was the one who convened this very interesting conversation, both the panel that was before you all and now this one. What can businesses do to continue to put this front and center? Weedmaps is clearly doing it, but there are so many other players in this space. What do they need to be doing? What can they be doing more of? We talked about the legislators. Let's talk a little bit about the businesses. Frank.
Yeah, so, you know, the businesses that have the expertise need to give back. And, you know, even in the training that we've done, it's all taught by subject matter experts. So those that are willing to give back and teach other entrepreneurs how to start a business, how to survive, I think they can do that. So certainly offer up their expertise, their knowledge, their lessons learned. Obviously, those that are in a position to help support financially, whether they help create funds or
grants or something,
grants, et cetera, to help some of the small businesses, that's critical as well. So those that have been more fortunate and are in the position to do that, you know, that would be great.
Armando, do you have?
I would strongly encourage, for those of you who maybe are already there, and for those of us who can influence, I think we need to encourage mid-size and large-scale operators to start developing their philanthropic agenda. There is a lot of resources coming through. There's opportunities you can do, you know, as my colleague said, through grants, but philanthropy. There's a lot of, you know, very recently our office was approached by a large operator wanting to kind of buy good favor with the community and attach their name to DPA and maybe give us a grant. And we in return said, that's all great, good, we can actually probably use your money, but instead, develop a good, comprehensive philanthropic agenda that is all-encompassing and reaches out to communities of color and grassroots organizations, not just the policy wonks that are gonna make you look good. So thank you, no. Right? And that's one thing. Develop your agenda. You got tons of dough. Use it responsibly. And then, yes, the outreach. Again, there's still tons of outreach that you can do. And, you know, whether it's with operations like the advocacy groups, you know, elected officials who are like-minded, or those of us in policy, we can always partner on disseminating information. Stigma. And I'll say this, stigma is one of the #1 killers of all our communities. When you stigmatize a community, and in this case, as it relates to drugs, you know, this is one of the biggest things that holds you back. I want to give props to our colleagues across the ocean in London, who several years ago developed a campaign, the folks at release.org, and you look them up, release.org, they did a campaign called Nice People Take Drugs. And at first, right, this laughter, you wonder if this is something touting drugs, but what they were doing is that it was a campaign that was meant to remind all of us that when you look back, peel back the stigma, peel back all the criminalization and the imagery and all that comes with drug use, you find a person who in fact is a brother or sister, a father or mother, a nice person who merely has a problem, and you need to address their problem through a public health lens, not a criminal justice lens. Nice people take drugs. And I would say education.
Thank you. Yvette.
You're right, Mondo. Nice people do take drugs because I saw them in court on a regular basis. Okay? So I can tell you, yeah, they do take drugs. And I hope you're all familiar with this concept called corporate social responsibility. Who's the watchdog? These companies that are out here making a lot of money, who said in their plans, oh, I'm going to give back, we're going to do this to the communities most harmed and all of that. Who's enforcing that? Who's the watchdog? What are they giving? Have you seen anything? I don't know of any company out there that could promote, this is what I'm doing for communities most impacted. Why aren't they doing it? Because no one's holding them accountable. This is about accountability, folks. Accountability, and it must start with you. I'll tell you what, for those of you who may not be into politics, I was watching the legislative hearing this morning, or the judicial hearing this morning on the whistleblower in the Trump administration. I have never seen such a play on words and the failure to just answer a yes or no question. This is the climate of the day. But until and unless these companies are held responsible to what they promised to do in order to get a license, you're not going to see a lot happen. So my suggestion, my advice is you contact your representatives locally and ask them, what are they doing to ensure companies are keeping up with their corporate social responsibility? And if they're doing that, we can see these things that we're sitting here talking about, because that's where the money is.
Senator.
I would definitely echo that, and not be used, because a lot of these corporations want to come into the community. They realize now it's millions of dollars of social equity, and they find what I call a social lubricant. They find somebody that looks like me. They find somebody that looks like you and says, yes, this is our minority. We're really embracing that. It's about accountability. And they can't continue to go to the usual suspects. I can tell you 9 times out of 10, when a corporation is going to give some money in supposedly communities of color, I know those organizations automatically that's going to get it, because that's the only organizations they look to. They look to the usual suspects that have been around for 50, 60 years, when it's a lot of upstart, great businesses, great community-based organizations. But again, you have to be visible. They have to know about you, but they're out there, and 9 times out of 10, you're not getting the funding. It's I'm not trying to cast any aspersions, but the NAACPs of the world, it's the urban leagues of the world. That's easy. Everybody knows those organizations, but it's the small organizations, the ones that Drug Policy Alliance works with, the upstart businesses, people like Yvette. These are the folks that you need to talk to realize where should we invest our dollars that's going to have the greatest impact. Because doing the usual suspects, that's easy. And we've let corporations get away with that for far too long.
And so my last question to the panel is, what do you hope to see in the next 5 years happen in an ideal world, both for California and for the country? But something that you think could be tangible and could be doable, not something that we know would be impossible. What would that be?
Certainly, more access for business entrepreneurs. I mean, the fact that 70% of the jurisdictions are still banning, cannabis really restricts the opportunities. I mean, there are many opportunities. They're flooding to these cities that are that have opened up early, but it's getting very crowded and very impacted. And hopefully those other cities, get the education, knowledge, and learn from the other jurisdictions to open up. So more access for entrepreneurs to start businesses, especially the minority small businesses that are, everyday struggling. They need opportunities in all these different communities. So that I would love to see that over the next few years as that opens up.
Great, thanks.
I certainly want to see. I want to see this 5-year moratorium extended for another 5 years before any large-scale operations come in. I want to challenge you, Senator, to help us with that because, your bill, thank goodness for it, it's only going to give us 2 years. So we need more time. We need to allow the folks here to develop their brand before we have large-scale operators come in. I want to see a greater effort on the part of legislators to somehow consolidate all of the bills that are coming through the legislature. Maybe there's some sort of ad hoc committee, just like we have a committee, a public health committee on public safety. Maybe we can develop a cannabis committee that looks at this volume of bills so that maybe there's ways that we can work things out together. And last thing I want to see is opportunities for people to ask questions because this brother's been riding me. So I'll pass it over and maybe afterwards.
Over the next 5 years, I would love to see the industry look like this room. That's what I want to see, first and foremost. The industry look like this room. And how is that going to happen? It's going to happen through you getting involved locally and doing things and letting people know what it is you want, let them know what you need, and most importantly, let them know what it's going to take to get there. They can put the resources together. You have to make them have the political will that they need to have because no one's going to do anything unless they're forced to do it. And unfortunately, in the political climate we have, the only thing most politicians respond to are votes, okay? And if you hold voting power, believe me, you're going to get their ear. That's what you have to do. And the last thing I would say, because we know big pharma's coming, we know big tobacco, we know big alcohol, we all know they're coming. I have talked with many of you who love to grow. You love to cultivate, and you're good at it, because when they're explaining stuff to me about, the triclones and all of this stuff, I'm sitting there like, what the heck you talking about? But the point I want to make with that, and hear me loud and clear, GW Pharmaceuticals, for example, they have over 100 patents already, over 100 patents on strains. So when they come in, they're going to come in heavy. For those of you who love to create, my suggestion to you is start working on creating different strains that are going to help people medically. And you know what you're going to do with that? You're going to take it to GW Pharmaceuticals because you're going to have something that they want. And lo and behold, make sure you have an attorney with you to negotiate the millions of dollars that you want to get from the strain you created, along with licensing. There is so much opportunity coming, y'all. You better take advantage of it now and start doing your thing, because in 5 years, and this is my opinion, this industry is not going to look like it looks now. And where will you be?
Can I share something just to back her up? Right now in the state of California, there's 1.4, 1.9 manufacturers production relative, and 14.1 for every retailer. So as she said, everybody's growing weed. 1.9% for 1.9 for every retailer production, 1.4 manufacturing, 14% plus for every retailer, 14 growers. The majority, Southern California. So yeah, saturated. I'm sorry, Senator.
Senator.
Again, change your perspective, and let's change the discussion on what cannabis really is. And we have to move it from the discussion of being a drug, an illicit product, to something that, again, we didn't create. We've improved it through science and technology and botany, but we didn't create this. So let's have that discussion. Have it in your churches, because it's a lot of churches that are hell no on cannabis, and it's saving a lot of their constituents and their lives. My father had glaucoma, and he went to the best eye institutes, Jules Stein at UCLA. Nothing helped him but cannabis. And we've seen the medicinal benefits. Israel has proven it to it. They've done more research on the medical benefits of cannabis than any other country in the world, yet and still, they still can't use it there in their own country. But we need to benefit from that. But the one thing that needs to happen in the next 5 years is move from a Schedule I, and we can bank this. Not until we bank cannabis will you have a legitimate business, because there's billions of dollars right now buried in the Emerald Triangle from growers from the last 40 years that can't take their money to the bank. Yet and still, you walk in as a legitimate business person on a weekly, daily basis and pay your taxes to the BOE, to the state of California, and then we walk your money across the street into a bank. So are we money laundering? So we have to find a way to allow those business entities, because why are you guys being robbed? Why are you guys being harassed? It's like Jesse James says, why do I rob banks? That's where the money is. People know this is a cash business, and they're going to continue to knock on your door and put guns to your head until we allow you to bank. So this needs to be banked in the next 5 years, and this market has to look like California in the next 5 years.
Thank you. A big round of applause for our participants. They will be here for questions, but I have to close it off. I want to. Okay, go ahead.
But you don't get to hold the mic.
Exactly.
I don't get to hold the mic.
I appreciate that you guys are here. You mentioned that there weren't a lot of audience members. Okay. Sorry. So we mentioned, I've been coming to social equity conversations throughout the last 2 years. And I've not heard a very simple thing in business that will solve all the problems in one simple thought. I don't even like to call it the black market. I call it the traditional or legacy market. So the underground market. So for social equity, one solve to clear out, because LA is having problems figuring it out. Do it under a nonprofit model. Very simple, right? Now you get the tax break that everyone's waiting for, and you de-incentivize the people who are trying to take advantage of the minorities. For the biggest nonprofit companies in the world, right? American Red Cross, United Way. People can get paid great salaries. You could diversify everything that's in the business. It's not just about growers. It's not just about bud tenders. It's about the business structure. So the problem is, there's a lot of investors who are conflicted. It's all about profit. They think cannabis is all about profit. If you go to the nonprofit model, that money should go back into the communities. The profit goes back into the communities. You get the tax break so you can deal with the underground market, and you'll have a successful model. Now we've taken all the greed out of social equity. I'm not saying that a nonprofit model is the only way to get rid of greed, but if you start there, you will win, and I will let you guys know this. I've been producing the Cypress Hill Smokeout for 20 years. I have marched on City Hall. I have marched on the Federal Building with my friends and my family and my artist friends. You guys are talking about, everyone says, declassify. Remember, you're being set up a little bit because the government wants you to go Schedule II. Big Pharma will be in control of it, so we're kind of being used to develop a model for big pharma to come in. And from my standpoint, all I really want is for everybody to band together, because legal cannabis is hard. There's a lot of arrows that people are taking in their backs. And all I'm saying is if we band together and get on the other side of the river, let's help each other up and use a nonprofit model. Not one person has mentioned it because they're probably conflicted. It's a very simple concept. Corporate culture in America says you need a structure. So please, if you're ever going to be in a situation,
We were waiting on this
use
question.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Weedmaps as well for putting together this robust conversation today, so let's give them a big round of applause. And thank you all for coming today. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys were great.